I want you to imagine the perfect day. The kind of day you've dreamed about since you were 5 years old, planning every detail, every song, every petal. The sun was streaming through the stained glass windows of the historic church. I was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and standing beside me was David, my perfect, successful, handsome fiancé. We were just minutes away from saying I do. I was about to become Mrs. David Sterling. But just as the priest asked if anyone objected, the massive oak doors slammed open and a man walked in. A man who looked exactly like David. He marched down the aisle, pointed straight at my fiancé, and then at me, and said one sentence that shattered my entire life. You can't marry him, because I am your husband. This is not a horror story. This is the true story of the most calculated, ruthless identity theft and betrayal that turned my wedding day into the ultimate revenge trap. Now, before I reveal how this absolute nightmare unfolded, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching us from? I need to know where I can find the strongest listeners. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button right now to join our community of true revenge story lovers. You won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Olivia, and to understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the height of the pedestal I had placed David on. David Sterling. He was everything I had ever mapped out for my future. We met at a charity gala in downtown Manhattan. He was a brilliant investment banker, charming, impeccably dressed, and spoke with the kind of calm confidence that immediately made me feel secure. He wasn't just wealthy, he was stable. My own family life was chaotic and emotionally draining, so stability was the currency I valued most. David was my anchor. Our courtship was a whirlwind of perfect moments. Expensive trips to Paris, quiet dinners where he actually listened to me, and meaningful conversations about our future home in the Hamptons. He was always attentive, always present. Yet, looking back now, there were always these tiny, almost imperceptible cracks in the facade. Moments of intense, cold anger that would flare up and then vanish, replaced by his usual placid demeanor. Sometimes, I would catch him staring at me with an expression that wasn't love, but something like calculating ownership. I remember once I accidentally spilled wine on his favorite expensive suit, and for a split second, the look in his eyes wasn't annoyance, it was pure, terrifying hatred. He quickly recovered, laughed it off, and said, "It's just a suit, darling." But that flicker, that coldness, stayed with me. I told myself it was stress from his high-pressure job. I constantly minimized the red flags. The proposal was a spectacle, private beach, a custom-designed ring, fireworks. I said yes immediately. The next 12 months were consumed by wedding planning. My mother, my bridesmaids, and I were obsessed with the details. The venue alone cost more than most people's annual salaries. Every detail was about showcasing the perfection of David and Olivia's life. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a statement. The closer we got to the date, the more withdrawn David became. He blamed work. He said he was closing the biggest deal of his career, a deal that would secure our future forever. I accepted it. I had to. My entire identity was now wrapped up in being Mrs. Sterling. Then came the morning of the wedding. Everything was running like a clockwork fairy tale. I was in my bridal suite, sipping champagne, surrounded by hair and makeup artists. David sent me a text message, "Almost ready, my forever love. See you at the altar." It was a perfectly sweet, normal text. It felt right. I remember feeling a moment of pure calm, thinking I made it. I won. The organ music began. My father walked me down the long, flower-lined aisle. I locked eyes with David. He was standing there, in his tailored tuxedo, his blonde hair perfect, his smile broad and reassuring. He looked every bit the powerful, loving man I was marrying. As I reached the altar, he took my hand, his grip firm and familiar. The scent of his cologne, a custom blend he insisted on, filled the air. The ceremony began. The readings were beautiful. The priest reached the most critical moment, the moment when promises are exchanged. The air was thick with expectation. The priest cleared his throat and began, "Do you, David Sterling, take this woman, Olivia?" That's when it happened. Kaboom! The massive, ornate oak doors at the back of the church burst open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Everyone, the 400 guests, the entire bridal party, the priest, and me spun around. Standing there, silhouetted against the bright sunshine, was another man. He was dressed in a simple, worn black suit, his hair slightly messier, his face twisted in a mask of desperate fury. But the terrifying, heart-stopping reality was that he was David. He was the spitting image of the man standing right next to me. The resemblance was so absolute, so complete, it defied logic. The man walked quickly, deliberately, down the aisle. Every eye was locked on him. The silence in the church was deafening, broken only by his heavy, determined footsteps. He marched right up to the altar, stopping just a foot away from my David. He looked at the David holding my hand, his eyes burning with accusation. Then he shifted his gaze to me. He pointed a trembling finger at me, then at the man beside me. His voice, raw and ragged, cut through the silence. "You can't marry him, Olivia, because he is a thief and a fraud. And I am the real David Sterling. I am the man you agreed to marry." My world dissolved. I looked at the man on my left, my fiancé, the man I loved, and then at the man on my right, the angry, desperate doppelganger. Both faces were identical. The shock was so profound that I couldn't breathe. My David, the David I knew, simply looked at the intruder with cold disdain and said, "Security. Get this lunatic out of here." But the second man, the intruder, didn't flinch. He looked at the priest and then back at me. "He is lying. He stole my life. He stole my name. He stole my entire identity." The ensuing chaos was beyond description. My father rushed forward. David's business partners started arguing about the legality of the interruption. But I, Olivia, stood frozen, holding the hand of a man who might not be who I thought he was, staring into the face of a man who looked like a ghost come to life. My mind raced back to all the tiny cracks, the strange flashes of anger, the calculating looks. Which one was the fake? Which one was the monster? The intruder, whose name I will call Daniel for now, didn't wait for security. He pulled a thick, folded document from his coat pocket and slammed it onto the altar. "This is the proof. This is the documentation. The real David Sterling is me. He is not a brilliant investment banker. He is a desperate, broke con artist. He stole my entire portfolio. And this woman is his last target." The David next to me finally reacted, but not in the way a shocked groom would. He lunged at Daniel with a primal scream of rage, tackling him to the ground. The brawl that erupted on the altar, in front of 400 of New York's elite, was the true end of my fairy tale. The security finally managed to separate the two men, who were bleeding, their expensive clothes torn, still screaming identical insults at each other. That's when the priest, bless his soul, picked up the document Daniel had slammed onto the altar. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a marriage license. It was a death certificate for a child named David Sterling who died 30 years ago, followed by a series of legal documents showing a complex name change and identity swap that occurred 15 years ago. The shock of the twin identity was not the final twist. The real, soul-crushing betrayal was in the financial details that Daniel began screaming to the room. The David I was marrying, the handsome banker, was actually a ruthless fraudster who had been impersonating his now-dead twin brother, Daniel, for years, after Daniel was declared legally deceased. No, wait. The document proved that David was the deceased one, and the man at the altar was Daniel, using his brother's identity. But Daniel, the intruder, claimed the opposite. The sheer confusion of it was designed to protect the true culprit. The entire church turned into a courtroom. Daniel, the intruder, began to expose the man at the altar. He screamed that the man was actually Jacob, a third party who had legally bought Daniel's identity after Daniel went into hiding from a massive loan shark debt. The story became too convoluted, too layered with fraud, too rich in betrayal. Then, the final, most devastating truth emerged, not from either man, but from a quiet, inconspicuous man sitting in the back pew, an investigator I later learned had been hired by a major bank. He stood up, calmly walked forward, and presented a final set of papers to the police who had just arrived. He stated clearly that both men, the David at the altar and the angry Daniel/Jacob intruder, were involved in a complex, multi-million-dollar scam involving offshore accounts and shell companies. The true identity of the man at the altar was irrelevant. He was simply using the David Sterling name because the real David Sterling was serving time in a maximum security prison for wire fraud. The purpose of the wedding? It wasn't love. It was a final, massive wire transfer that was scheduled to be processed just as the marriage certificate was signed. My father's massive trust fund contribution to the wedding was the target. They needed me, my reputation, and my family's wealth to launder their final shipment of stolen money. I was just the final, beautiful cog in their terrible machine. I looked at the man who was moments away from being my husband. His face was no longer composed. It was raw, exposed. The perfect veneer was gone, replaced by a desperate, trapped animal. He wasn't David. He was just a thief. I slowly removed the custom-designed ring from my finger, dropped it onto the blood-spattered altar, and walked away. I walked past the arguing guests, the flashing cameras, the police officers, and right out of the church. I left behind my dress, my dreams, and the man I thought I loved. My revenge was not loud. It wasn't a scream or a public confrontation. My revenge was simply allowing justice to take its course. The real David Sterling, the one who actually existed, was destroyed by his own greed and the terrible, tangled web of lies he wove with the help of his associates. The police arrested both men that day, the fake groom and the furious intruder, on multiple charges of fraud and identity theft. My family's money was protected. But I, Olivia, lost something far more valuable, my ability to trust. I lost my perfect day, but I saved my entire future. Tell me what you think of this horrifying wedding day revelation in the comments below. Did I do the right thing by walking away? And if you believe true justice was served, please make sure to like the video and share it with a friend who needs to hear this shocking story. Thank you for listening to my truth.